Okay, hello everybody. We are going to be going over the circulatory system in regards to the blood vessels. We already did circulation in another lecture, so we're not going to necessarily go over that circulation. I've cut down this PowerPoint that comes with this textbook by a lot of slides, so you're only going to be required to know the things that I am talking about in the video. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to talk about blood vessels today. And again, like I said, we talked about the blood flow through the heart in another lecture, so we're not going to go through that. We'll just talk about the blood vessels, the veins, and their corresponding arteries. So there are three principal categories of blood vessel. As you can see on the screen, we have our arteries that we spoke about that carry blood away from the heart. We have veins that carry blood back towards the heart. Okay, remember that's always how we are going to define those two blood vessels. We're not going to define them as they carry oxygen or they carry deoxygenated blood. We always refer to them by the direction in which they carry blood, either to or from the heart. Capillaries are the third type of blood vessel. They're going to be the smallest blood vessels that you have, and they are going to connect your arteries to your veins. Okay, so here we have some micrographs of different blood vessels. You can see these under microscopes. Under any normal microscope, you can see this top picture. And here we have the different portions of the arteries and the veins. We're going to talk about these individually, but that's what you would see under a regular microscope. Looks like a lot of chaos and a lot of madness, but it all works the way it's supposed to. Here we have an electron micrograph of arteries and veins. You can see much more detail in the walls of the arteries and veins and the surrounding tissues. Okay. So, as I said before, there are different portions of the blood vessels, and the walls of your arteries and veins have three layers that we call tunics. Okay, just like a tunic, it would be like a robe in like ancient Greece or something like that. Tunics are also going to be found in the vessels of your arteries. So you have the tunica interna, which is going to be the innermost wall of the blood vessel, the tunica externa, which is the outermost wall of the blood vessel, and then in between those two, you have the tunica media, which is going to be the wall that lies in between them. Okay. The tunica interna, which is the most internal, like I said before, the most internal portion of the blood vessel, is going to be the one that lines the inside of the blood vessel. It's exposed to the actual blood. The blood, it actually makes contact with flowing blood through it. And it has an endothelium, okay, which is also the inner lining of the blood vessel, which is made of simple squamous tissue, simple squamous epithelium, okay, which means simple squamous means one layer of squamous cells. It's a selectively permeable barrier, which means that it does allow things to flow through, but not everything. That's why it's called selectively permeable. Okay, permeable means it allows things to pass, but selectively means there are certain things that can pass, certain things that cannot pass. Okay, it secretes chemicals that will stimulate either dilation or constriction depending on what it needs at the time. Right? If your body requires dilation of these blood vessels to increase blood flow, okay, so those arteries and blood vessels will increase in size so that more blood can flow through them. Sometimes you want constriction. Sometimes you want that blood vessel to shrink in order to slow the blood flow down. Okay, and the endothelium or the tunica interna will produce those chemicals. Okay, normally this area repels blood cells and platelets so that clotting does not occur. Sometimes you want clotting to occur, and then a whole different cascade will happen, which we talked about in previous lessons. When the tissue around the vessel is inflamed, the endothelial cells will produce cell adhesion molecules. And what that will do is it'll cause white blood cells to adhere to the surface and congregate in tissues where they might be needed. Okay, so that inflammation could be caused by bacterial infection, And that's a bacterial infection is going to cause that inflammation, which is then going to call for leukocytes in the area to come and help that particular tissue. It's a reaction just to get help to solve the problem, whatever that problem is, be it a bacterial, viral infection, something like that. The tunica media, which is the middle layer, okay, is going to consist of smooth muscle. It's going to consist of collagen and elastic tissue. Okay, so we spoke about 3 different types of tissue, muscle tissue, last semester. Okay, we have smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. Okay, the smooth muscle is going to be a portion of your smooth muscle is going to be found in your blood vessels. The majority of it's in your digestive tract, but there is some in your blood vessels. This strengthens the vessel, prevents blood pressure from rupturing them, right? Because the amount of internal pressure that you have from your blood, from the pumping of blood through your from your heart, if the walls of the if the walls of your veins and arteries were too thin, they could rip and they could break, right? If you had a hose hooked up to the outside of your house, you wouldn't want that hose to be very thin, okay? Because if you turn on the faucet and all that water rushes from the water main into your hose, it could break the hose. That happens a lot with those shrinky hoses. Do you ever see those hoses that will you turn it on and it enlarges, and you turn off the water and you let it out of the hose and it shrinks down into this little ball? Those are great hoses as far as convenience goes, but they are not very well manufactured. Okay, over time, and it's not even that much time, because the walls of those hoses are so thin, they break. Okay, and that happened. That you don't want that happening to your blood vessels. Okay, the contraction of the muscle in the tunica media is going to control the diameter of that vessel. So that constriction or that dilation is going to be controlled by the contraction of that muscle inside of the blood vessel. Okay, the externa, the tunica externa, which is the outermost layer. Okay, it's going to consist of loose connective tissue, which merges with neighboring blood vessels, nerves, or other organs. If you ever do a dissection, you will notice that things look like they stick to one another. Okay, and that's for a reason, right? That's not by accident. That's there for a reason. And one reason is so that you don't get things tangled and caught on one another, right? You don't want your blood vessels getting caught on edges of bones and getting torn and things like that. We talked about the heart, okay? We talked about the pericardial sac and the mediastinum connecting to like the posterior part of the sternum, so that your heart doesn't jostle around when you move around. Your heart will stay with your sternum as you move and run and jump and whatever. Same thing with your blood vessels. You want them to be kind of locked in place by touching other things that surround them, right? So you might open you might open up a pig, or you might open up a cat, or whatever it is that you're dissecting, and you go into the heart area, or the area of the thorax where you see the descending aorta, okay, and the inferior vena cava, and it looks like they're actually touching each other, and it looks like they're connected. You try to pull them apart, and it looks like there's sticky stuff between it. Okay, that sticky stuff is the loose connective tissue that holds your blood vessels together. They're not one vessel; it's 2 separate vessels, but they're kind of stuck together with this connective tissue, so that they don't tangle around one another, or get torn or anything like that. Okay, so it anchors the vessel and provides passage for small nerves and lymphatic vessels. Okay, and the vasa vasorum, these are small vessels that supply blood to outer part of the larger of the vessels. Here we just have a picture of the different layers of the blood vessels in different types of blood vessels. So here we have large arteries, large veins, medium arteries, medium veins, small arteries, small veins, and then finally our capillaries over here. And we can see how the thickness is going to differ between the tunica interna, the tunica externa, and the tunica media, between the different sizes of these blood vessels. Okay, we classify our arteries and our veins by their size, just like this picture suggests. Okay, we have large, medium, and small arteries. We have large, medium, and small veins. Okay, so we have names for each one of these that we need to know. Okay, so arteries are sometimes called resistance vessels because of their strong, resilient tissue structure. They're very tough. Okay, arteries have to be very tough. They have to be very strong. They have to be very sturdy because they are the ones that deal with the most pressure. Okay, the heart is directly connected or pumps directly into arteries. Okay, when your heart pumps, it pushes blood through arteries. It doesn't push blood through veins. Veins bring blood back to the heart. Okay, so when the heart pumps, all that pressure from that pump goes directly through arteries away from the heart. Okay, the pulmonary arteries, aorta, all those other arteries that we're going to talk about today. So they are called resistance structures. Okay, the biggest of all the arteries are called conducting arteries. Okay, um, examples are going to be the aorta, the common carotid arteries in your neck, your subclavian arteries underneath your clavicles that go to your arms, the pulmonary trunk of the pulmonary artery that goes into your lungs, and the common iliac arteries. Those are arteries that are near the iliac bone of your pelvis, of your coxa. Okay, these expand during systolic blood pressure. Right, they expand during systolic blood pressure, and they recoil during diastolic blood pressure. Okay, so they expand to accommodate the pressure that is being forced upon them during systolic blood pressure, and they recoil when the heart relaxes, because that's what diastolic blood pressure is. It's the relaxation of the heart. Okay. The medium-sized arteries are called distributing arteries, and what they are going to do is they are going to distribute blood to specific organs. So when you have arteries coming off of those large arteries, these medium arteries, they're going to bring blood to other places. Okay, so for example, the brachial artery. Okay, the brachial artery is the artery that goes through your bicep. Okay, and that's going to come off the large artery, which is your subclavian. Okay, so your subclavian will merge with your brachial so that you can get blood to your arm. Okay, and so on and so forth. The femoral artery, same thing. Okay, that the femoral arteries are going to come off of the iliac arteries that come off of your hips. Your renal arteries, which are the arteries of your kidneys, the splenic arteries of your spleen, these are all distributing or medium-sized arteries. You have smooth muscle layers that could constitute 3/4 of the wall thickness. Okay, so the walls of arteries are going to be much, much thicker than the walls of veins, and therefore they're going to have more smooth muscle, and that's because of all the pressure, the internal pressure from the pumping of the heart. And then you have small arteries called resistance arteries. Okay, these are going to be thicker. They're going to have thicker tunica medias in proportion to their lumen, which means their internal or external tunicas. They can sometimes be called arterioles, okay, which are the smallest of all the arteries. They can be 200 millimeters in diameter, and only 1 to 3 layers of smooth muscle can be found in them. And they're going to control the amount of blood to various organs as well. Okay. But they are the smallest of all the arteries. And if you go back to the picture, we can see the size difference in all three. So here's your large conducting artery, your distributing artery, and your arteriole. Okay. 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 An aneurysm. Okay. A lot of times we hear this term aneurysm. What an aneurysm is a weak point in an artery or a heart wall. Okay. So if you have some type of weakness in the wall of the hose that we spoke about before, eventually that weakness will be exposed and the hose will break. Okay. Same thing could happen with your blood vessels. Okay. If you have a thinned wall, okay, that thin wall can then eventually lead to a bursting of that blood vessel, which in most cases is not going to be good, which results in what we call an aneurysm. Okay, so forms a thin wall, a bulging sac that pustulates with each heartbeat that may rupture at any time. So just imagine a small little sac. Every time the heart beats, that sac gets engulfed with blood every single time the heart beats. Okay, and that could potentially, at any pump could cause that the rupture of that particular blood vessel. Okay, the most common sites for these blood vessels are the abdominal aorta, which is the aorta in the portion of the abdomen, the renal arteries, and the arterial circle at the base of the brain. Okay, all of those are places you do not want to have aneurysms. Okay, they can cause pain by putting pressure on other structures because the blood that's pouring out of those arteries, okay, is going to push on other organs in the surrounding area. That bleeding that occurs once it does rupture is called a hemorrhage. That's internal bleeding. Okay. Why does it happen? It could be congenital, weakness of blood vessels. So it's over time, or you could be born with genetic issues. Could be some type of trauma that caused it. Okay, some type of accident that you were in, or some type of incident that you had, or a bacterial infection could cause an aneurysm. Okay, the most common cause is atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of the arteries with plaque and things like that, which could cause the walls of the blood vessels to thin out, and hypertension, which is high blood pressure. Okay, so you definitely don't want high blood pressure. Here is a picture of an aneurysm. So here's the abdominal aorta, which leads down here into the common iliac arteries down here and here. And here is the aneurysm in the abdominal aorta. Okay. And you can see the blood that is exiting right there. Okay, capillaries. Let's talk about those. Capillaries are exchange vessels. So basically where a vein ends and an artery begins, or vice versa, where an artery begins and a vein ends, it doesn't really matter. This is where they meet up, right? Where an artery and a vein end up meeting. Okay, I told you in the other class or the other lecture, I think I might have, if I didn't, I'm telling you now, your circulatory system is closed, right? There are no openings in your circulatory system out to tissues, okay? So if you need blood into a tissue or you need blood into an organ, that blood will diffuse out of the circulatory system through the walls of the arteries and veins and into that tissue. It's not like your artery goes from your heart to your liver and blood just pours over your liver and your liver's fine with that. That's not how that works. Okay, the cells diffuse out of the arteries and into your organs and your tissues. Okay. With that said, there has to be a connection between your arteries and veins, because whatever's in your arteries has to go back to your heart through your veins. And that connection between the two is called a capillary. The connection between an artery and a vein is called a capillary. Okay, so this is where gases, nutrients, waste, and hormones pass between the blood and the tissue fluid. Okay, so this is where things are going to exit, leave, and go from one type of blood vessel to the other. Okay, we do not find capillaries in the following places, and this is why it's hard to heal these places. You don't find capillaries in tendons. You don't find capillaries in ligaments. You don't find capillaries in your epithelia, in your corneas of your eyes, the lenses of your eyes. These places tend to not heal very well if you damage them, right? Blood flow is the major cause of healing in your body. So if you damage a muscle, it heals because it's muscle. It has lots of capillaries, has lots of blood vessels or blood flow. You damage a ligament like an ACL tear, MCL tear, things like that, you have to have surgery for that. Okay, it's not going to just heal on its own. You break a bone, there's lots of blood flow to a bone. You have capillaries and arteries and veins in your bones. So you can set those two pieces of bones together and over time they'll heal. Okay, not like that with tendons and ligaments. Okay, now let's talk about veins. Okay, we have different sized veins. Okay, veins are going to be thin and flaccid. Okay, so a hose is thick and I don't want to say erect, but they're sturdy, right? They're not going to fall. If you hold a hose, okay, that hose isn't necessarily just going to, flop over. Okay, it'll have some rigidity to it. It'll have some structure to it. Okay, veins are not like that. Veins are kind of like, diffused balloons, okay, or empty balloons. They're just flaccid. Okay, they collapse when they're empty, and they expand very easily. Okay, they have a much greater capacity for blood than arteries, which means they can hold more blood. And if you look, you can see here you have 64% of all your blood is contained in your veins at one given moment, and 15% of that is in your arteries. The rest is in your tissues and your capillaries and things like that. Okay, but the majority of your blood at any given moment is going to be inside your venous system. Okay, and that's because they're thinner, and if they're thinner, they have more room. They have a much larger diameter, and they're going to be able to hold more blood. Okay, they have a steady flow. Okay, so if you cut an artery, okay, and there's a video of a hockey goalie many years ago, got cut on his neck while he was playing hockey, and it cut his carotid artery. And whenever you cut an artery, that artery is directly connected to the pumping of your heart. So you see the blood coming out of his neck with his heartbeat. Okay, so every time his heart beats, it's a spurt of blood, psh, psh, like that. If you cut a vein, okay, if you cut your jugular vein, it doesn't squirt out because that jugular vein is very far away from your heart in comparison to the carotid artery, which is directly connected to your heart, right? So you have your heart, you have your carotid artery going up your neck into your brain, okay? And then at some point, there's a capillary that brings that back down through your jugular vein all the way back down to your heart. So you're literally double the distance, right? So from the heart to the carotid artery is immediate, and it goes up here, and then for your jugular, it's all the way here and then all the way back, right? So the distance is pretty much doubled. So the blood doesn't pump, okay, because there's not much pressure behind it. Blood will kind of flow out, okay, and it's like if you cut a water bed, okay. If you cut a water bed, okay, the water's just going to pour out of that water bed. It's not going to pump, okay. There's fairly low blood pressure in your veins, okay, and that's why the bottom number is so important. So now if we take a look at the distribution of blood in adults, that's exactly what I just said. 64% is in your veins, 15% is in your arteries, about 7% in your heart, and 5% is in your capillaries. Okay, you have things called postcapillary venules. These are the smallest type of veins that you have in the body, just like arterioles. These are venules. Okay, they're about 10 to 20 millimeters in diameter. They are very, very porous, which means things can pass through them a little bit easier. They're much more porous than your capillaries, and they can exchange fluid with the surrounding tissues. And one thing that leaves through these areas in the venules is leukocytes, which are white blood cells. Okay, so when white blood cells want to enter the body or want to enter the bloodstream, okay, they can do so through venules. Okay, we have different types of venules. We have a muscular venule, okay, which receive blood from postcapillary venules. They receive blood from these types of venules. Okay, they're up to 1 millimeter in diameter. That's really tiny, right? Because these postcapillary ones are 10 millimeters. These are 1 millimeter in diameter. Okay, very, very small. Then we step up to our medium-sized veins, which could be 10 millimeters in diameter. They have a very thin tunica media and a much thicker tunica externa. Okay, the tunica interna will form valves. Okay, so your veins in these medium-sized veins are like the canal system. Okay, if you know anything about canals, like the Erie Canal, or there's lots of different canals. I can't think of them off the top of my head. The way canals work is it's a series of portions of canal that fill up with water and then drain water and then fill up with water and drain water to get a boat through a particular area. Your veins are very much like that too, because they lack pressure, okay, and they have to fight gravity, right? Your heart, everything gets pumped, and the body uses the force of the heart to fight gravity going up to your head, going out to your arms, and things like that. For all that blood to go back up to your heart from your feet and from your legs, from your abdomen, okay, you need to have some type of system that's going to allow you to defy that force of gravity, which is going to be this canal system. So blood will, let's say it's in your feet, right? Let's say there's a volume of blood that's in your feet, and that blood has to go back to your heart. Every time your heart pumps, that force is behind the veins, okay? Now, your veins are very far away from your heart, so there's not that much force. That's why it's low pressure. But there's some pressure. So that blood might get pushed from in one pump, that blood from your foot might get pushed up into your ankle. And then the next pump, that blood from your ankle gets pushed up to your calf. And then the next pump, that blood from your calf goes to your knee. And then pumps, it goes to your thigh. And then another one goes up to your hip. And another pump goes up to your abdomen. How is it going from like level to level to level to level without falling back down? With valves, right? So as you go up your veins, there are valves, right? Blood gets pushed up through the valve closes, and the blood stays on top of that. Another pump, it goes up to the next one, the valve closes, and it keeps going up and up and up, but it goes up in these small segments with the help of these venous valves. Okay. If these valves fail and you have backflow, okay, that can result in what we call varicose veins. Okay, varicose veins are the veins that you find a lot of times on people's legs near their knees. Okay, and it's due to those valves not working properly. You can get them surgically removed, where they would bypass them with other veins and things like that. Okay. Okay, we have sinuses that aren't necessarily in your face, but they're called venous sinuses. These are really, really, really thin walls in these veins. Okay. And these could include the coronary sinuses or the coronary veins. We talked about coronary arteries, okay, and how they have to feed the heart and how small they are that they can't even do angioplasties on those. They have to do bypasses. So you have to have, in order to have coronary arteries, you have to have coronary veins, okay, and they come in this form of coronary sinuses, okay. Then you have large veins, which are greater than 10 millimeters in diameter. They have smooth muscle. They have smooth muscle in all three of their tunicas or tunics. Okay, and some examples are the Vena cava, the pulmonary veins, the jugular veins, and your renal veins. Those are large examples. Okay, again, varicose veins. Just want to bring that up because it's something that people deal with on a regular basis. Blood pools in the lower legs of people who stand for too long. And that stretches out the veins. The cusps and the valves pull apart and weakens the vessel. And then you have backflow, which distends the vessel, makes it swell, and their walls grow even weaker, and the walls have even more of a chance of tearing, and that develops in what we call varicose veins. Okay, so it could happen. It could be a hereditary thing. You can inherit that gene from your parents. It could be caused by obesity or pregnancy. Okay. A varicose vein in the anal canal has a special name, and that's called a hemorrhoid. It's nothing different than a varicose vein in your leg. It's just the place where it's located. Okay, same basic thing. You have veins in your sphincter muscles, and when those get impinged on from sitting too much or from struggling when trying to go to the bathroom, okay, hemorrhoids can result. Okay, here's a picture of varicose veins in the leg. Okay, veins don't normally look like that. Okay, so now that's all we're going to, as far as the types of arteries, types of veins, what they do, where they're located. Now what we're going to do is basically go through all the veins and arteries that I want you to know. Now, sorry about that. Okay, basically what I would like you to know is only the ones that I'm going to tell you to know. All right, so I'm going to bring up pictures of arteries and veins throughout the body. We are not going to need to know every single one in the picture. Okay, if you were a med student, then yes, okay. And if you go to medical school, then you'll have to deal with that. But for our purposes, we're not going to need to know that. So the simplest and most common route for blood is the following: heart to an artery to an arteriole, which is the smallest, right? And as you go further away from the heart, the smaller those blood vessels get. Okay. For arteries, the closer you get to the heart, the more thick they're going to be, the bigger they're going to be, because they need to deal with all the pressure directly from the heart, because the heart is where all the pressure comes from. And when it pumps, the next thing that deals with that pressure has to be able to handle that pressure. So arteries have to be the biggest. And then as that artery travels from the heart to your brachial artery to your fingertips, it's going to get a lot smaller and smaller and smaller because the pressure drops as you get further away from the heart. And then through capillaries, which go through the smallest types of veins called venules, which then go through larger veins, which go back to the heart, which go back through arteries, and this whole thing is a cycle. Okay. In this route, blood passes through only one network of capillaries from the time it leaves the heart until it returns. Okay. So here we have just a general overview of the arteries, and this is just the arteries in the body. Okay, and again, I'm not going to need you to know all of these. We're going to actually go through them all in segments. So we're going to go through the head and neck. We'll go through the arms. We'll go through the thorax and the legs separately, instead of me trying to circle tiny little things on here. Okay, I will. Let me see if I have will this work? It will work. Okay, good. So I'll be able to write on here, I think. Okay. Okay, so here are the ones that I need you to know. I need you to know the ascending aorta. Okay, so the ascending aorta is the aorta that goes up from the heart towards the neck, and then it makes a curve downward, but it's the part that goes up. Okay, this is going to split, and I'm going to show you a picture of this, into the left and to the right coronary arteries that supply the heart. We have the aortic arch, which is that curve that I was just talking about. We have the brachiocephalic artery. Brachio means arm, and cephalic means head. Okay, brachio means arm, cephalic means head. This brachiocephalic region is going to break up into the right common carotid artery, which goes to your head, the right side of your head, and the right subclavian, which goes to your right shoulder. Okay, that's on one side. On the other side, we have our left common carotid artery, which feeds the left side of our head, and our left subclavian, which supplies the shoulder and upper limb of the left arm. And I'm going to show you pictures of this. So I'm talking fast. I'm saying a lot of things. I'll show you pictures of all this. Okay. Then we have the descending aorta. The descending aorta, which could also be called the thoracic aorta. The thoracic aorta is going to be above the diaphragm. Okay. So the heart, the aorta turns and goes down behind the heart. And even though it's descending, okay, that part is still descending, going down. The portion where it's descending above the diaphragm is called the thoracic aorta because it's in the thorax. It's between the heart and the diaphragm. And then once it passes the diaphragm and goes into your abdomen, we call that the abdominal aorta of the descending aorta, or the abdominal portion of the descending aorta. Okay, so let's take a look here. Okay, so let me see if I can draw here. Okay, so here is our, let's see, did I not pick some type of, okay. I don't want to pick red. I want to pick a different color and pick blue. Okay, so here is our ascending aorta, this part right here. Okay, this right here. Now, this ascending aorta is going to break off into our brachiocephalic region. And this whole thing is the brachiocephalic region. Okay, that whole area. Okay, this brachiocephalic region is on the right side. Remember, this is the right, and this is the left. Okay, this brachiocephalic region is going to break it up into two parts. Okay, this part that goes straight up to your head is called the carotid artery, the right common carotid artery. And then the other portion of the brachiocephalic region is going to go to your right arm, underneath your clavicle, which is why it's called subclavian, under clavicle. Okay, sub means underneath, like submarine. Clavian means clavicle. R means right. Right subclavian. Okay, right subclavian. The left side here of the ascending aorta, or the aortic arch, doesn't necessarily do the same thing. It looks different. Okay, notice how these two arteries, the common carotid and the right subclavian, they branch off of this brachiocephalic trunk. Well, there is no brachiocephalic trunk on this side. Now, the reason for that is you need an extension here because the heart is slightly to the left. Okay, your heart is slightly to the left of your body, just very little bit. Okay, not very much, but just a little bit. But it's enough to where it won't be able to reach. It won't be able to reach the right common carotid and the right subclavian. And because it's a little bit to the left, we need a little extender. And this brachiocephalic trunk is the extender to get these over to where they need to go. Because this heart is to the left a little bit, these two arteries that supply the left side of the arms and the left side of the head, they don't need this extender. Okay, only the right side needs that extender. So over here, we have the left common carotid artery that goes up to the brain. And separate from it, unlike here, it's completely separate here. This is the left subclavian. So that goes underneath your left clavicle. This side goes underneath your left clavicle and to your arm. Okay. This here, where we have our bend in the aorta, is called the aortic arch. Okay. And at that aortic arch, that's when we're going to start to get our descending aorta. Okay. So that descending aorta starts here and travels down behind the heart. I'm drawing a line over the heart because I have to, but this aorta goes behind the heart. Okay, we should actually draw that with dotted lines because that's how they would normally draw it. And let me use red this time. Okay, so this aorta is actually going to go down behind the heart like this. Whenever you see dashed lines, that always means it's behind. Okay, so this aorta, this descending aorta here, is going to flow down behind the heart. And here's the diaphragm. Okay, this is the diaphragm. So this whole section between these two lines is the thoracic. Whoops. Trying to do this with the pen here. This is the thoracic. So the thoracic aorta. Okay, that's your thoracic portion of the descending aorta right here. Okay. Here is the diaphragm, which is the barrier between your abdomen and your pleural cavity. Right, so the pleural cavity, where your lungs are, your mediastinum and all that stuff, your thoracic cavity, it's divided by this diaphragm. Okay, and this diaphragm is this muscle that helps you breathe. But then here we can see that the aorta is going to go right through that diaphragm. Okay, and we call this the abdominal aorta. I'm not going to draw it out because it's right here. Okay, that's called the abdominal aorta. Okay. Let me erase that. Can I erase everything at one time? What do you think? What do we think? Okay, let's see. I gotta see if I can erase all this stuff at once. Maybe not. That's okay. I'll just erase it. Oh, there we go. There we go. Good. Got it. Okay. Back to this. Okay. Here are the veins, major veins, same thing as the major arteries. Again, we're going to go through those individually. Let's take a look at the veins of the head and neck, kind of like what we did with the arteries. Okay. Again, I'm not going to ask you to know all of these. Okay. That would be ridiculous. Okay. The only ones I really want you to know, and for the most part, I got to be honest here. Let me get a little sip of coffee. I got to be honest here. If you know the veins or you know the arteries, you automatically know the other one because they're typically named the same. The only thing that changes at the name is vein or artery. For example, okay, you have a brachiocephalic vein, just like you had brachiocephalic artery. You have subclavian veins, okay, just like you had subclavian arteries. There are some differences, don't get me wrong. I mean, they're not all named the same. For instance, the vein that kind of correlates to the carotid arteries, the ones that go up your neck, those are called jugular veins. So they're not carotid veins, they're jugular veins. Okay. You have two jugular veins. You have ones that are internal, that are more deep, and you can see them. Okay, you can see it here. Nice big vein. And then you have external jugular veins, which are a lot smaller and more superficial than the internal jugular veins. Okay. Those are the only two that I want you to know on this particular model. Okay. Okay, here we take a look at the arteries of the thorax. And again, we looked at a lot of the ones that I want you to know. Okay, we looked at aortic arch. We already got that. Check. Okay, we looked at the carotids. We looked at the brachiocephalic trunk. We looked at the subclavian. We looked at the descending. Okay, the only other one that I want you to know from here is actually, that's all I want you to know from here. Okay, we don't need to know any more from this model. Okay, there's tons of these things. There's hundreds of these things. We don't need to know every single one of them. Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at the arteries of the abdominal portion of the body or abdominal region of the body. Okay. So there are a couple here that I definitely want you to know. Okay. I want you to know the renal vein or the renal arteries. Okay. Here's the renal artery. And the renal artery goes to the kidneys. Okay. You can see it here. Here's your descending aorta coming out of the diaphragm. That's what this area, this muscular area is over here. So here's our descending aorta. And you can see that branching off into each one of your kidneys. And those are called your renal arteries. Okay. If we go down a little further, we can now see the common iliac artery. Okay, which is going to be here and here. So that signifies the end of the descending aorta. Okay, that's why it's important. Okay, so here's our descending aorta, and where it splits, that is going to be our iliac arteries. They're called iliac arteries because you have the iliac bone or the iliums over here of the pelvis. Right, you'd have your sacrum in the back. Okay, you'd have your pubic bone in the front. Okay, but your iliac arteries, oops. Okay, iliac arteries are right here and again on this side. Okay, so you need to know renal and you need to know iliac on this page. Okay. We want to know certain arteries that deal with your organ systems. Okay, and there are some that deal with the liver and the gallbladder and the spleen, and we want to be able to identify those. Okay, so we want to know the hepatic artery. That's the one that feeds the liver. Okay, and you can see it here and here. Okay, we'll definitely want to know those. You want to know the splenic artery here. Okay, which is right, this nice big one right here. And you want to know the common hepatic artery, which is going to be right here. That's the artery that comes off of the aorta and eventually up the liver to the hepatic artery. So you have the common hepatic artery, which goes right up there into the liver. Okay. In the stomach side, okay, we have gastric arteries. So anything that's really covering the surface of the heart, we have our gastric arteries. Okay. Okay, if we take a look at the same region of the body, but now looking at veins instead of arteries. Again, here's our diaphragm. Instead of calling this our descending aorta, we call it the vena cava. Okay, so we want to know vena cava, the inferior vena cava, the superior vena cava is on the top. Okay, that inferior vena cava is going to go down and is going to branch off into your kidneys, and that's called your renal arteries, or veins, right renal vein, left renal vein. Okay. And again, we have our iliac veins, which are going to be right the exact same portion that our iliac arteries were. Okay. Let's take a look at the arm, the upper limb, of the arteries of the upper limb. Again, we're not going to need to know all of them. Okay. But we do want to know the carotids. We do want to know that. We do want to know the brachiocephalic trunk. We looked at that already. We want to take a look at the subclavian. Okay, underneath your armpit, okay, we have our axillary artery. Okay, axillary artery. And then the major blood vessel that runs along your bicep, down your arm, that is called the brachial artery. We definitely want to know that. That's one place you can actually take a pulse on someone. If you press hard enough on their bicep, you can feel the brachial artery. Okay. You want to know the ulnal, or the artery that feeds the ulna, and the artery that feeds the radius. Okay. The easiest way to do that is the ulna. The ulnar collateral artery. U is always on the pinky side. U up. UP up. Okay, so the ulna, the ulnar artery will always be on the pinky side. So just remember the word up, and you'll remember that. The radial collateral artery, which feeds the radius, is going to be on the thumb side. Right, it's always going to be on the opposite side. Okay. And here you have your radial ulnar artery continued. Okay, as they go down. Okay. Okay, as far as the venous system goes, it's going to be very similar. Okay, once again, jugular veins, brachiocephalic veins. Here's my superior vena cava. Okay, subclavian vein, axillary vein. Okay. Instead of brachial, we have the cephalic vein. Okay, that's one name that changes. Okay. Here's our actual brachial vein. Okay, so the location is not in the same spot. Okay. In your elbow, you have the cubital vein. Boy, now I'm not going to ask you to know that. And here's your radial and ulnar vein. Okay. So I want you to know basically the same things, right? Basically the same things. Okay, let's take a look at the leg. Okay, here's our descending aorta, which breaks up into our common iliac. Right, there's our common iliac. The only ones I want you to know are the femoral arteries, right here, that run down your thigh. I want you to know the popliteal artery, which is behind your knee, right here. And we'll also do the fibular artery, okay, which runs down your calf. Okay, so femoral, popliteal, fibular. Okay. For the venous system, again, here's our inferior vena cava, iliac vein, femoral vein, popliteal vein, here's our fibular vein, and I do want you to know the tibial vein. And I'm second guessing myself if I mention the tibial artery. Let's go back up one. Okay. Oh, yeah, I forgot it. Okay, add that to the list too. Tibial artery with the tibial vein, fibular artery, and fibular vein. Okay. That's it for the veins, okay, and arteries. Okay, so there's not that many compared to the list that's here. There really isn't that many that I'm asking you to know and be able to identify. Okay, so how would I really test that for you? I would try to get this thing out of here. The way I would do that is by giving you a picture more or less like this and asking you to label the ones that I want you to label. This whole thing would be blank, and I would only put tags or sticks pointing to the ones that I want you to label. All right, so I would want you to label, if this is the veins, I want you to label the jugular veins, brachiocephalic, subclavian, axillary, iliac, femoral, fibular, tibial, popliteal, again femoral, ulnar, radius, brachial, inferior vena cava, hepatic, renal, superior vena cava. Okay. The other ones that I did not click on are not needed. Okay. Same thing for the arteries. If we go back up to the arteries. Okay. Same basic principle here. We have our subclavian, we have our axillary, brachial, ulnar, radius, aorta, femoral, popliteal, tibial, fibular, iliac, renal, splenic, hepatic, aortic arch, subclavian, brachiocephalic, carotid, there. And all the other ones you don't have to worry about. Okay. And the last slide on this whole thing here, or the last two slides, talked about hypertension, which is basically high blood pressure. Okay. It's the most common cardiovascular disease. affecting about 30% of Americans over 50 years old. This is a silent killer because you don't necessarily know you have it until it affects you. And once it does affect you, it typically results in a heart attack, or stroke, or kidney failure. My dad had no idea he had hypertension. He had high blood pressure, but he had no idea it was so bad until he had a heart attack. Okay, and what heart attacks do is it damages the tissues of your heart. It kills tissues of your heart, called the myocardium. And that myocardium enlarges because of that damage and gets stretched out. And once it's stretched out, it doesn't necessarily work as good over time. Okay. And I think that is, there we go. Okay. Primary hypertension, which could be due to obesity, sedentary behavior, which means, not moving around, not exercising, poor diet, nicotine use. Okay. Smoking is linked to heart disease. That's 90% of the cases of hypertension are due to those factors. That's primary hypertension. Secondary hypertension, increased blood pressure due to other diseases. Okay. Kidney disease, arteriosclerosis, hyperthyroidism, Cushing syndrome. But these are much more rare in the cause of hypertension. Okay. So there you have it. There's your lesson on blood vessels and arteries and veins and capillaries. I will see you next lesson.